The massive Azurian warship hovered silently above Mars, its dark metal hull absorbing the dim sunlight. On the command deck, Commander Zaxtor gazed at the small human colony through the view screen. His six-fingered hand tapped impatiently on the control panel. The red planet seemed so insignificant, and the humans even more so. Scans show primitive shielding and basic weapon systems. Commander reported his second-in-command. The colony houses approximately 5,000 humans. Zaxtor's mouth tentacles twitched with amusement. The High Council wishes to understand how these creatures might respond to pressure. A cautionary strike seems appropriate. He turned to his weapons officer. Target their main habitat dome. Low-yield plasma cannons should be sufficient. The weapons officer nodded and input the commands. Outside, the massive ship's underbelly began to glow with blue energy. Inside the Mars colony's main control room, Lisa Blackwell stared at her sensor readings with growing horror. The alien ship had appeared without warning, bypassing all their early detection systems. Now it was charging weapons. "Everyone to the emergency shelters," she shouted, slamming her hand on the colony-wide alarm. Red lights flashed throughout the habitat domes as colonists rushed to safety. Lisa stayed at her post, frantically typing commands to strengthen their shields. Her fellow technician, Sam Kent, looked at the sensor readings and went pale. "Those energy readings. Our shields won't hold." "Get to the shelter, Sam," Lisa said, her voice steady despite her fear. "I need to send a message to Earth." The first blast hit like a hammer, shaking the entire colony. Cracks appeared in the habitat dome as the shields failed almost instantly. Lisa clung to her station as the room tilted. The air began to thin as the dome's integrity failed. With trembling fingers, she activated the emergency broadcast system and spoke into the microphone. "This is Mars Colony 1. We are under attack by an unknown alien vessel. They gave no warning." Another blast hit, and part of the ceiling collapsed nearby. She coughed as dust filled the air. "This appears to be a show of force. They are technologically advanced. Earth must prepare." She attached the sensor data to the message and hit send, just as the lights flickered out. Zaxtor watched with clinical interest as the habitat domes collapsed one by one. Curious. They had time to raise shields, however ineffective. Yet I see no return fire. "Perhaps they have no weapons," Commander suggested his second. "All species develop weapons before venturing to other planets. It is the natural order." Zaxtor turned away from the view screen, already bored. "They are hiding their capabilities. No matter. They will understand their place now." Lisa dragged herself toward the emergency beacon as the room filled with the thin Martian atmosphere. Her lungs burned, and her vision narrowed to a tunnel. With her last strength, she activated the beacon and collapsed beside it, her oxygen running out. The message from Mars Colony 1 reached Earth 20 minutes later. In the United Nations Emergency Council chamber in New York, world leaders watched the transmission in stunned silence. The final moments showed the alien ship firing repeatedly on the defenseless colony before departing. President Alan Garrett stood before the assembled leaders, his face grim. 5,000 people. Scientists, engineers, families. His voice was quiet but filled the hushed room. Killed without provocation or warning. He looked at each representative in turn. For a century, we wondered if we were alone in the universe. Now we know. But they have made a critical error. He clenched his fist. They believe us weak. They will learn differently. Across Earth, military bases went on high alert. Deep beneath the Nevada desert, a facility unknown to the public began powering up. Similar installations in the Ural Mountains, the Australian outback, and beneath the Amazon rainforest hummed to life. In orbit around Jupiter, hidden from conventional detection, a lone space station received a coded transmission. Captain Jeff Howard read the message and turned to his crew. "It's happening," he said. "Operation Sentinel is now active. Alert the fleet." The scattered elements of humanity's secret defense force began to move, emerging from hiding places throughout the solar system. The Azurians had started a war. Humanity would finish it. The massive Azurian warship hovered silently above Mars, its dark metal hull absorbing the dim sunlight. On the command deck, Commander Zaxtor gazed at the small human colony through the view screen. His six-fingered hand tapped impatiently on the control panel. The red planet seemed so insignificant, and the humans even more so. Scans show primitive shielding and basic weapon systems. Commander reported his second-in-command. The colony houses approximately 5,000 humans. Zaxtor's mouth tentacles twitched with amusement. The High Council wishes to understand how these creatures might respond to pressure. A cautionary strike seems appropriate. He turned to his weapons officer. Target their main habitat dome. Low-yield plasma cannons should be sufficient. The weapons officer nodded and input the commands. Outside, the massive ship's underbelly began to glow with blue energy. Inside the Mars colony's main control room, Lisa Blackwell stared at her sensor readings with growing horror. The alien ship had appeared without warning, bypassing all their early detection systems. Now it was charging weapons. Everyone to the emergency shelters, she shouted, slamming her hand on the colony-wide alarm. Red lights flashed throughout the habitat domes as colonists rushed to safety. Lisa stayed at her post, frantically typing commands to strengthen their shields. Her fellow technician, Sam Kent, looked at the sensor readings and went pale. Those energy readings. Our shields won't hold. Get to the shelter, Sam, Lisa said, her voice steady despite her fear. I need to send a message to Earth. The first blast hit like a hammer, shaking the entire colony. Cracks appeared in the habitat dome as the shields failed almost instantly. Lisa clung to her station as the room tilted. The air began to thin as the dome's integrity failed. With trembling fingers, she activated the emergency broadcast system and spoke into the microphone. This is Mars Colony 1. We are under attack by an unknown alien vessel. They gave no warning. Another blast hit, and part of the ceiling collapsed nearby. She coughed as dust filled the air. This appears to be a show of force. They are technologically advanced. Earth must prepare. She attached the sensor data to the message and hit send, just as the lights flicker out. Zaxtor watched with clinical interest as the habitat domes collapsed one by one. Curious. They had time to raise shields, however ineffective. Yet I see no return fire. Perhaps they have no weapons, Commander suggested his second. All species develop weapons before venturing to other planets. It is the natural order. Zaxtor turned away from the view screen, already bored. They are hiding their capabilities. No matter. They will understand their place now. Lisa dragged herself toward the emergency beacon as the room filled with the thin Martian atmosphere. Her lungs burned and her vision narrowed to a tunnel. With her last strength, she activated the beacon and collapsed beside it, her oxygen running out. The message from Mars Colony 1 reached Earth 20 minutes later. In the United Nations Emergency Council chamber in New York, world leaders watched the transmission in stunned silence. The final moments showed the alien ship firing repeatedly on the defenseless colony before departing. President Alan Garrett stood before the assembled leaders, his face grim. 5,000 people. Scientists, engineers, families. His voice was quiet but filled the hushed room. Killed without provocation or warning. He looked at each representative in turn. For a century, we wondered if we were alone in the universe. Now we know. But they have made a critical error. He clenched his fist. They believe us weak. They will learn differently. Across Earth, military bases went on high alert. Deep beneath the Nevada desert, a facility unknown to the public began powering up. Similar installations in the Ural Mountains, the Australian outback, and beneath the Amazon rainforest hummed to life. In orbit around Jupiter, hidden from conventional detection, a lone space station received a coded transmission. Captain Jeff Howard read the message and turned to his crew. "It's happening," he said. "Operation Sentinel is now active. Alert the fleet. The scattered elements of humanity's secret defense force began to move, emerging from hiding places throughout the solar system. The Azurians had started a war. Humanity would finish it. The old man stood at the window of his lake house, watching the sunset. Admiral Frank Campbell had been retired for 5 years, fishing and writing his memoirs. The phone rang. He knew before answering that his peaceful retirement was over. "Campbell," he said into the receiver. "Sir, Protocol Omega is active. The car will be there in 20 minutes. The line went dead. Frank looked around his simple home one last time, then went to the closet and pulled out a sealed box he had hoped never to open again. 68 years earlier, in 2089, astronauts Kevin Moore and Patricia Alvarez had made the discovery that changed everything. Their mission to Europa, Jupiter's ice moon, had been planned as a standard exploration. What they found beneath the ice was anything but standard. Kevin's voice had crackled over the radio back to Earth. "Houston, we found a structure. It's not natural, and it's not ours." The structure was an abandoned outpost with technology far beyond human understanding. The mission was immediately classified at the highest level. Only a handful of world leaders were informed. Now Frank rode in a military helicopter headed for Cheyenne Mountain. Below him, cities continued their normal routines, unaware of the Mars colony's destruction or the threat heading their way. Inside the mountain, Frank was escorted to a conference room where the Joint Chiefs of Staff waited. A screen showed the message from Mars and the destruction of the colony. General Harris nodded to Frank. "Admiral, welcome back to active duty." Frank didn't waste time. "How ready is the fleet?" "The UES Vengeance is fully operational. 4 more ships are at 90% readiness," said General Harris. "The rest need at least 2 weeks." "We may not have 2 weeks," Frank said, studying the alien ship's specifications from Lisa Blackwell's data. "What about the quantum drive?" The door opened, and a woman in a lab coat entered with a younger man. "It works," she said simply. Frank nodded. "Dr. Harrison, Dr. Wells, I was told your drive was still theoretical." Dr. Diane Harrison smiled slightly. "We had a breakthrough last month. The Vengeance has already completed 3 test jumps. We can put a ship anywhere in the solar system instantly." Her colleague, Dr. Gregory Wells, added, "And the aliens won't see it coming. Their sensors didn't pick up our test signals." Frank turned to a star map on the wall. For decades, humanity had hidden its most advanced projects from itself. While the public saw modest space stations and moon bases, secret facilities in the asteroid belt and beyond Neptune had built a fleet like nothing Earth had officially produced. "How many ships total?" Frank asked. 500 combat-ready vessels, in various stages of completion," General Harris replied. "But only the Vengeance has the new drive installed." "Then we start with her," Frank said. "And we need a plan that buys time for the rest of the fleet." In a vast hangar hidden within Ceres, the largest asteroid in the belt, Captain Susan Rodriguez walked the corridors of the UES Defiance. Her ship would be the second to receive the quantum drive once the engineers finished the installation. "Captain," her executive officer called out, "we've received new orders. Admiral Campbell is taking command of the fleet." Susan nodded. Frank Campbell was a legend among the secret fleet. If he was back, the situation was grave indeed. Across the solar system, hidden shipyards hummed with activity. Engineers worked around the clock installing weapons and drives. Crews trained for combat scenarios against technologically superior forces. In a laboratory on Titan, Dr. Harrison carefully monitored the installation of a quantum drive cord in the UES Defiance via remote link. The technology was derived from the Europa outpost, but enhanced by human innovation. The aliens would expect primitive rockets and basic energy weapons. They would face something very different. Frank stood in the command center beneath Cheyenne Mountain, looking at the deployment of the Azurian ships. They were gathering for what looked like a full assault on Earth. "They think we're defenseless," he said quietly. "Let them keep thinking that." He turned to his communications officer. Send a message to the Azurians. Tell them Earth wishes to discuss terms of surrender. The officer looked shocked. Sir, it's not a real surrender, son. It's buying us time. Frank looked at the star map again, his eyes determined, and preparing the biggest surprise in military history. Ambassador Daniel Foster straightened his tie as the small shuttle approached the massive Azurian command ship. Through the viewport, the alien vessel looked like a floating city, all sharp angles and glowing blue energy lines. His pilot, a young lieutenant named Maria Diaz, kept her eyes focused on her controls. Remember, Ambassador, she said quietly, the transmitter in your watch will record everything. Try to see as much of their ship as possible. Daniel nodded slightly. His real job title was Director of Special Intelligence, but today he was playing the role of a frightened diplomat. Just be ready for extraction if things go wrong. The shuttle docked with a metallic clang. Daniel took a deep breath and picked up the case containing the surrender documents. Inside was much more. Sensors disguised as official seals, mapping technology hidden in the paper itself. 2 Azurian guards met him at the airlock. They towered over him, nearly 8 feet tall with blue-gray skin and 4 arms each. They wore what looked like ceremonial armor, though Daniel knew it was fully functional. Follow, one said in rough English. Their translation technology was impressive but still imperfect. Daniel was led through wide corridors, filled with Azurian crew members who stopped to stare at the human. He carefully memorized the layout, noting defense systems and access points. His watch silently recorded everything. In the command center, Emperor Krulvox sat on a floating throne. Unlike his soldiers, he was smaller with delicate features and 6-fingered hands that moved constantly. His skin was pale blue, almost translucent. So, the Emperor said, his voice surprisingly melodic, the Earth sends its surrender already. Disappointing. We expected more sport from you. Daniel bowed low, playing his part perfectly. Your Excellency, after witnessing your power at Mars, our leaders recognized the futility of resistance. We ask only for time to prepare proper tributes and to explain to our people why submission is necessary. The Emperor laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Your species learns quickly. This pleases me. How much time do you require? 14 Earth days, Your Excellency. Our economy must be reorganized to serve the Empire. Daniel kept his eyes downcast, the picture of submission. Meanwhile, deep in the asteroid belt, Admiral Campbell oversaw the final preparations of the fleet. The UES Vengeance, humanity's first fully operational warship with the quantum drive, hovered at the center of the hidden shipyard. Its dark hull absorbed light rather than reflected it, making it nearly invisible against the backdrop of space. Captain Susan Rodriguez was now aboard her ship, the UES Defiance, as engineers made final adjustments to the newly installed quantum drive. Drive calibration complete, Captain, her chief engineer reported. We can jump on your command. Susan nodded. Keep all systems in standby mode. No emissions that could be detected. Across the solar system, 20 more ships were receiving their quantum drives. The rest of the fleet moved slowly into position, using the natural cover of asteroids and planetary shadows to hide their movements. Back on the Azurian ship, Daniel was carefully placing the surrender documents on a ceremonial table. Each placement was precise, ensuring maximum coverage for the hidden sensors. These require your personal seal, Emperor, Daniel said, pointing to several marked spots on the documents. As the Emperor leaned forward to examine the papers, Daniel activated the final sensor with a hidden switch in his sleeve. It began mapping the entire command ship's interior, focusing on vital systems and weaknesses. The Emperor placed his seal on the documents with a flourish. There, the formal submission of Earth to the Azurian Empire is complete. He looked at Daniel with his large, pupilless eyes. Your cooperation will be remembered when we divide your world's resources. Daniel bowed again. You are most generous, Your Excellency. In the hidden command center on Cirrus, Admiral Campbell received the first data transmissions from Daniel's sensors. He smiled grimly as ship schematics appeared on his screens, showing power conduits, shield generators, and weapon systems. "They have no idea what's coming," he said quietly. The final piece of the plan was set. Earth appeared submissive and defeated. The Azurians believed they had conquered without resistance, and in the darkness of space, humanity's response waited like a coiled spring. Daniel Foster boarded his shuttle for the return journey, his mission complete. As the small craft pulled away from the massive Azurian ship, he allowed himself a small smile. The deception was perfect. Now the real war could begin. Captain Susan Rodriguez sat in the command chair of the UES Defiance, her eyes fixed on the countdown display. The bridge was silent except for the soft beeping of computers and the steady breathing of her crew. This would be the first real combat test of the quantum displacement drive. "All systems ready, Captain," her executive officer reported. "Quantum drive at full power." Susan nodded. "Remember, we'll have exactly 3 minutes before their sensors detect us. Make every second count." The mission was simple but dangerous. Appear inside the Azurian defensive perimeter, strike their flagship, plant quantum beacons throughout their fleet, and escape before they could respond in force. "Targeting solutions locked," the weapons officer said. "We're ready." Susan took a deep breath. "Begin quantum jump in 3, 2, 1. Jump." The stars outside the view screen blurred, then vanished. For a fraction of a second, the ship existed everywhere and nowhere. Then reality snapped back into focus, and the Defiance appeared directly beside the massive Azurian flagship. Inside the Azurian command ship, alarms blared as sensors detected the sudden appearance of a vessel where none had been a moment before. Emperor Krelvox rose from his throne, his face twisted in confusion. "What is happening?" he demanded. His sensor officer stared at the readings in disbelief. "Impossible. A human vessel has appeared inside our defense perimeter." Before the Emperor could respond, the first volley of missiles from the Defiance struck the flagship's main power conduits. The entire ship shuddered as explosions rippled along its hull. On the Defiance, Susan barked orders. "Launch beacons. Target their weapons systems next." Small, nearly undetectable devices shot out from the human ship, attaching themselves to various Azurian vessels. Each beacon contained quantum entanglement technology that would allow the rest of the human fleet to jump directly to these locations later. Ambassador Daniel Foster, who had remained on the Azurian flagship as a liaison, moved quickly through the corridors as chaos erupted around him. The Azurians had kept him aboard as a hostage, never suspecting he was part of the attack plan. He slipped into a maintenance shaft that his hidden sensors had mapped earlier. In his hand was a small device that would disable the flagship's main shield generator. He placed it carefully on a power coupling and activated it. The device burrowed into the alien technology like a digital parasite. On the bridge of the flagship, Emperor Krelvox watched in growing horror as systems failed throughout his ship. "Return fire," he screamed. The Azurian weapons officer frantically tried to lock onto the human vessel, but it moved with unexpected speed and precision. Their technology. It's not primitive. The Defiance executed a series of maneuvers that should have been impossible, evading most of the Azurian counterfire while continuing its precise attack. The data from Ambassador Foster's sensors allowed them to hit exactly where the alien ship was most vulnerable. Susan checked the mission timer. 40 seconds left. Fire the main cannon. The Defiance's spinal-mounted particle cannon, technology reversed engineered from the Europa Discovery, powered up and released a blinding beam of energy that cut through the Azurian flagship's weakened defenses. The beam severed the ship's command section from its engines. Inside the flagship, Daniel Foster felt the ship lurch as its sections began to separate. He ran toward his predetermined extraction point, a small hangar bay where a stealth shuttle waited. 2 Azurian guards tried to stop him, but he pulled out a small weapon and fired. The guards dropped, stunned by the electrical discharge. On the Defiance's bridge, Susan's communications officer reported, "Ambassador Foster is clear. He's in the shuttle. 15 seconds until they can track us," the tactical officer warned. Susan nodded. "Retrieve the shuttle and prepare for quantum jump." The small human shuttle slipped into the Defiance's hangar bay. Daniel Foster ran onto the bridge just as Susan gave the order. "Jump now." The Defiance vanished in a flash of quantum energy, leaving behind a crippled Azurian flagship and a fleet thrown into chaos. Moments later, the Defiance reappeared at the edge of the solar system. Susan turned to Daniel with a grim smile. "Did you get what we needed?" Daniel nodded, holding up a small data crystal. "Complete schematics of their entire communication network, and the beacons are all placed." In his throne room, now running on emergency power, Emperor Krulvox shook with rage. "Find Earth. Burn it to ashes. No mercy." His commanders rushed to obey, unaware that they were now marked targets for humanity's coming wrath. The sky above New York City filled with Azurian warships. Their sleek blue metal hulls reflected the morning sun as they moved into attack formation. Similar scenes played out over London, Beijing, Moscow, and a dozen other major Earth cities. On the ground, the streets were eerily empty. No panicked crowds fled the alien ships. No emergency vehicles raced through the avenues. The cities seemed abandoned. From his command ship, General Vriltar of the Azurian Assault Force frowned at the sensor readings. "Where are the humans?" he demanded. His sensor officer looked confused. "Scans show minimal life signs in the urban centers, General. It appears they have evacuated." Vriltar slammed his fist on the control panel. "Impossible. We gave them no warning of our attack." He glared at the empty city below. "No matter. We will destroy their infrastructure and force their leaders to watch their civilization burn." He gave the order, and energy weapons fired from the Azurian fleet. Beams of destructive force slammed into skyscrapers and bridges. But as the dust cleared, something unexpected happened. The buildings remained standing, protected by shimmering energy shields that had activated at the moment of impact. Suddenly, defense turrets emerged from rooftops and parks across the city. They swiveled upward and returned fire with startling accuracy. "They have defensive capabilities," Vriltar shouted. "How is this possible?" In a hidden command center beneath Denver, military leaders watched the battle unfold on massive screens. The automated defense systems were working perfectly, keeping the Azurians occupied and confused. General Harriet Mills nodded with satisfaction. They took the bait. All major Azurian forces are committed to the Earth attack. She turned to her communications officer. "Send the signal to Admiral Campbell. Operation Guillotine is a go." On the edge of the solar system, Admiral Campbell received the message aboard the UES Vengeance. He addressed the captains of 20 fully equipped ships with quantum drives. "The Azurians have committed their forces to Earth, exactly as we predicted. Our automated defenses will hold them for hours. Meanwhile, we strike at their heart." He pointed to a holographic map of Azurian space. "The quantum beacons planted by the Defiance give us direct access to their homeworld. Remember your targets and maintain radio silence once we arrive." The 20 ships activated their quantum drives simultaneously. In an instant, they'd vanished from the solar system. Back on Earth, the Azurians were growing frustrated. Their weapons seemed less effective than expected against the human defenses. General Vriltar ordered more ships into the attack, pulling them from patrol duties around Mars and Jupiter. "The humans have surprising technology, but they cannot withstand our full might," he insisted. "Continue the bombardment." What the Azurians didn't know was that most of Earth's population had been quietly evacuated to underground shelters and off-world colonies in the days before the attack. The cities were largely empty, defended by automated systems designed to absorb and endure the alien assault. The 20 human ships reappeared near Azuria Prime, the homeworld of the Azurian Empire. The planet was beautiful, with swirling blue clouds and 3 small moons. It was also heavily defended, with orbital platforms and a defensive fleet. Lieutenant Commander Richard Ortiz led a squadron of 5 smaller ships that broke away from the main group. Their mission was critical: disable the planetary defense grid before the main attack. Stay in formation, Ortiz commanded his pilots. Their sensor grid has a 3-second delay. Exploit it. His ships darted between the defensive platforms, launching precise strikes at power nodes and communication arrays. The Azurian home fleet scrambled to respond, but they were caught completely off guard. They had never expected an attack on their homeworld, especially not while their main forces were attacking Earth. One by one, the defense platforms went dark. Ortiz's squadron moved with practiced precision, following plans developed from years of studying the alien technology found on Europa. Defense grid is down 60%, reported Ortiz's tactical officer. Main fleet is clear to approach. Admiral Campbell's voice came over the secure channel. Well done, Commander Ortiz. Begin Phase 2. In his palace on Azuria Prime, a junior officer rushed into Emperor Krulvox's private chambers with news that would shake the Empire to its core. Your Majesty, the officer said, his voice trembling, human warships have appeared in orbit. They've disabled most of our defense grid. The Emperor stared in disbelief. Impossible. Their planet is under attack. They have no fleet capable of reaching us. The evidence is undeniable, Your Majesty. They are here, and more ships are arriving. The orbital monitoring station above Azuria Prime was the first to detect the new energy signatures. The technician on duty watched in disbelief as his screens filled with alerts. One human ship had been concerning enough. Now hundreds of new signals were appearing throughout the system. Send emergency broadcasts to all military channels, he ordered, his voice shaking. Unknown vessels appearing at all strategic points. Across Azurian space, the impossible happened. Human warships materialized near every major military installation, shipyard, and defense platform. There was no warning, no time to prepare. One moment space was empty, the next it was filled with the dark hulls of Earth's hidden fleet. In the grand meeting hall of the Imperial Palace, Emperor Krulvox gathered with his military high command. The massive holographic display in the center of the room showed the positions of the human ships. The Emperor's skin had paled to almost white, his eyes wide with shock. 500 vessels, the Imperial Admiral whispered. They have 500 warships. How could we not know? Before anyone could answer, all communication screens in the room activated simultaneously. The face of Admiral Frank Campbell appeared on every display. I am Admiral Frank Campbell of Earth's Combined Defense Fleet, he said, his voice calm but forceful. You struck without provocation. Now witness the consequence. The Emperor stepped forward. This is impossible. Your species was primitive, confined to your solar system. Campbell's expression remained stern. You made assumptions based on what we allowed you to see. For decades, we studied the alien outpost on Europa. We learned about your empire and many others. We prepared while remaining hidden. On board the UES Retribution, Captain Laura Bennett received her orders. Her ship, positioned near the Azurian Military Academy, would demonstrate humanity's tactical capabilities to the next generation of Azurian officers. Precision strikes only, she told her weapons officer. Training facilities and weapon depots. No barracks or residential areas. The Retribution's weapons fired with surgical precision. Energy beams sliced through defense shields as if they weren't there. Orbital drones deployed from the ship's bays, neutralizing anti-aircraft batteries before they could respond. Inside the academy, young Azurian officers watched through windows as their training ships and advanced weapon systems were systematically destroyed. Yet the human vessels made no move to target the living quarters or administration buildings. Back in the Imperial Palace, the Emperor's top scientists studied the sensor readings from the human ships with growing horror. Your Majesty, he said, their technology. It's not just from the Europa outpost. I'm detecting elements from at least 3 different alien civilizations, all integrated and improved upon. The Emperor turned to his intelligence chief. What does he mean? The intelligence chief looked ill. It means, Your Majesty, the humans didn't just find one alien outpost. They found several from different species. They'd been studying all of us. On his flagship, Admiral Campbell watched as reports came in from across Azurian space. The sudden appearance of humanity's fleet had achieved complete strategic surprise. Azurian commanders were surrendering their posts rather than face certain destruction. Sir, his communications officer reported, we're receiving transmissions from other worlds in the Azurian Empire. Non-military leaders requesting to speak with Earth representatives. Campbell nodded. This was expected. Intelligence had indicated that many worlds under Azurian rule were there unwillingly. Tell them we will speak with any legitimate government representatives once military operations are complete, he replied. On Earth, the Azurian attack was faltering. As news spread through their fleet about the attack on their homeworld, many ship commanders began pulling back. Some even attempted to flee the solar system, only to find quantum mines waiting for them along their escape routes. General Vriltar received the shocking reports from home in his command ship above New York City. His forces were caught between Earth's surprisingly effective defenses and the knowledge that their own homeworld was now under threat. We have been outmaneuvered, he admitted to his officers. Send word to all ships. Cease the attack. Maintain defensive positions only. In the Imperial Palace, Emperor Krelvox watched the holographic display as more human ships appeared around key planets in his empire. His military leaders argued among themselves, some advocating immediate surrender, others insisting they should launch their doomsday weapons. The Emperor silenced them with a gesture. Gather all remaining forces, he ordered. We make our stand at the Imperial Palace. The humans may have surprised us, but they will not find the heart of the Empire undefended. What the Emperor didn't realize was that humanity had been preparing for this conflict for longer than anyone knew, and they had studied their enemy very, very well. The Imperial Palace of Azuria Prime gleamed like a massive crystal under the light of the twin suns. Its towering spires and defensive shields were the pride of the Azurian Empire, a symbol of their supposed invincibility. Now it was the last stronghold of Emperor Krelvox's rapidly crumbling rule. Around the palace, the Emperor had gathered his remaining loyal forces. Elite guard units took positions at every entrance. Powerful energy cannons tracked the sky, waiting for human ships to come into range. In orbit above the planet, Admiral Campbell surveyed the situation from the bridge of the UES Vengeance. Most of the Azurian military had already surrendered, their commanders realizing the futility of resistance. Only the Emperor and his most devoted followers remained defiant. The last reports from Earth confirm that all Azurian forces have ceased hostilities. Campbell's executive officer informed him. General Vriltar has formally surrendered the invasion fleet. Campbell nodded. Good. Now we need to end this without further bloodshed if possible. He turned to his tactical officer. What's the status of the ground assault team? Lieutenant Martinez and his squad are in position, sir, waiting for your order. Lieutenant Jason Martinez and his team of 20 Special Forces soldiers crouched in the shadows of an ornate garden near the palace's east entrance. Their armor, reverse-engineered from alien technology, allowed them to blend in with their surroundings almost perfectly. Each soldier carried weapons designed specifically for this mission. Non-lethal when possible, but deadly accurate when necessary. Remember, Martinez told his team quietly, we want the Emperor alive, and civilian casualties are to be avoided at all costs. This isn't about revenge. It's about justice. Inside the palace, Emperor Krelvox paced nervously in his throne room. His once magnificent ceremonial armor now seemed heavy and awkward. A dozen of his most loyal guards stood at attention around him. The humans have no right to judge me, he said bitterly. I acted as any ruler would to protect my empire from potential threats. His chief scientist, Valtek, worked frantically at a control panel near the throne. The device is almost ready, Your Majesty. Once activated, it will release enough energy to destroy the entire capital city. If we cannot win, At least we can ensure the humans gain nothing from their victory. Outside, Martinez gave the signal. His team moved forward silently, using small devices to disable the palace's external sensors. 2 Azurian guards at the garden entrance suddenly slumped to the ground, hit by tranquilizer darts. The human soldiers entered the palace, moving like shadows through the ornate corridors. When they encountered palace staff, civilians who were simply doing their jobs, they quietly directed them toward exits where other human teams waited to escort them to safety. The central computers of the palace had been mapped thanks to data collected earlier by Ambassador Foster. Martins knew exactly where to find the Emperor and what other dangers might be waiting. "Sir," his communications specialist whispered, "we're picking up unusual energy readings from the throne room. Some kind of power buildup." Martinez frowned. Intelligence had warned about a possible doomsday device. "We need to move faster." Team 2 create a diversion at the main entrance. On the other side of the palace, explosions and alarms suddenly blared. The Emperor's remaining forces rushed toward the apparent attack, leaving the path to the throne room less guarded. Martinez and 5 soldiers quickly made their way to a service corridor that led directly behind the throne room. Using a small plasma cutter, they created an entrance through the ornate wall. Inside the throne room, the Emperor heard the commotion at the main entrance. "They're here," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "Activate the device now." Scientist Valtek's fingers moved across the control panel. "It requires your final authorization, Your Majesty." As the Emperor stepped forward to place his hand on the panel, a section of the wall exploded inward. Martins and his team poured through the opening, weapons raised. "Step away from the controls," Martinez ordered. The Imperial Guards immediately opened fire. Energy beams crisscrossed the throne room as humans and Azurians took cover behind columns and furniture. Despite being outnumbered, the human soldiers' superior training and technology gave them the edge. Martinez spotted the Emperor rushing toward the control panel. With a perfect shot, he hit the panel with a concentrated EMP burst, shorting out the controls. "No," the Emperor screamed, his plan for mass destruction thwarted. Outside the palace walls, a surprising scene unfolded. Hundreds of Azurian civilians gathered, watching the battle. But they weren't cheering for their emperor. Years of oppressive rule had turned many against him. As the human ships hovered protectively over civilian areas of the city, an unexpected ally emerged in humanity's final push for victory. The last shot echoed through the imperial throne room. Lieutenant Martinez stood over the fallen guards, his weapon still raised. In the corner, Emperor Krelvox knelt with his hands raised in surrender, his once proud posture now bent in defeat. "The doomsday device is disabled," reported one of Martinez's team members. "We found the backup controls and neutralized them." Martinez nodded and spoke into his comlink. "Admiral, we have secured the palace and captured the Emperor. No casualties among the civilian staff." Outside the palace walls, something unexpected was happening. As word spread that the Emperor had been captured, Azurian civilians began to approach the human soldiers. They did not come with weapons or anger, but with relief on their faces. An elderly Azurian female stepped forward, her ceremonial robes marking her as a member of the civilian council. "For generations, we have lived under the Emperor's harsh rule. Many worlds in our empire have suffered similarly. We wish to speak with your leaders." 3 days later, the Grand Hall of the Imperial Palace hosted a very different gathering. Representatives from Earth sat on one side of the massive crystal table. Across from them were delegates from 27 worlds that had been part of the Azurian Empire. Admiral Campbell entered with Ambassador Foster and Captain Rodriguez. On the other side, the Azurian Civilian Council members took their seats, led by Council Elder Zelna. "Today marks a new chapter in galactic history," Zelna began. "The military rule of Emperor Krelvox has ended. Now we must decide what comes next." Campbell spoke clearly and directly. "Earth did not come here to conquer or replace one empire with another. We defended ourselves against aggression, nothing more. A representative from Taurus IV, a planet long oppressed by the Azurians, stood up. For centuries, the Azurian military kept other worlds isolated from each other. Now we learn that humans manage what we could not. They found our scattered outposts and learned from them all. He bowed slightly to the humans. There is much we can learn from each other. Over the next hours, the outlines of a new galactic council began to take shape. Each world would have equal representation. No single species would dominate the others. And Earth, despite its military advantage, asked only for the same single vote as every other world. Meanwhile, on Mars, a solemn ceremony took place. Where the colony once stood, now a memorial garden bloomed under a new protective dome. At its center stood a statue of Lisa Blackwell, the lone colony survivor whose warning had given Earth the time it needed to prepare. Governor Paul Collins laid a wreath at the base of the statue. We gather to remember the 5,000 lives lost here, the first casualties in a war we did not seek. Their sacrifice will never be forgotten. Back on Azuria Prime, as the negotiations continued, Emperor Krulvox was brought before an assembled court of representatives from all affected worlds. He stood tall despite his defeat, still clinging to his pride. Admiral Campbell read the charges: unprovoked attack on a peaceful colony, resulting in 5,000 deaths. How do you answer? The former emperor sneered. I did what any ruler would do when facing a potential threat. An Azurian from the civilian council stepped forward. No, you did what a tyrant does. And now you will face justice from all the worlds you've harmed. 6 months later, the rebuilding had begun. Human engineers worked alongside Azurian construction teams to restore damaged cities on both worlds. The technology that had been developed for war was now being adapted for peace. Quantum drives providing rapid transportation between distant planets, energy shields protecting vulnerable settlements from natural disasters. In the newly established Galactic Council headquarters on a neutral moon, Admiral Campbell, now serving as Earth's first representative, walked through the main hall with Elder Zelda. Did you ever imagine this outcome when you were planning your defense? She asked. Campbell shook his head. We prepared for war, hoping it would never come. Now we must work just as hard for peace. They stopped by a large window overlooking a playground where children from a dozen different species played together. Among them, a young human boy was teaching an Azurian child how to play catch. This is what matters now, Campbell said, watching the children. Not who has the biggest fleet or the most advanced weapons, but what kind of galaxy we build together. The Azurian child caught the ball and laughed, a sound that echoed through the hall. It was the sound of a future neither humanity nor the former Galactic Empire could have imagined, a future they would now create together.